Thank you very much. Good morning. My name's Barry Bowen and I'm from fcase. Today I'm going to talk about fraud and cybersecurity orchestration in the finance sector. So firstly, imagine this. Imagine that all banks' cybersecurity and fraud systems are disconnected. They operate in their own special way based on their own speciality. The reality is not all these fraud systems know the full picture of fraud. They're disconnected, they're siloed. This is a clear advantage for fraudsters. Really simple, clear advantage for fraudsters. No clear picture, you do not know all the steps the fraudster did. The first step, the second step, the third step, and so on. Systems such as phishing, vishing, for example, malware, transactional fraud, e-commerce, AML, all of these systems are disconnected. Every single bank. It's around about 77% of all tier 1 and tier 2 banks are physically disconnected in some way. This means that fraud investigations is incredibly hard to operate. This means that fraudsters are just slipping through the gaps every single day. This is a significant challenge, but fraud is actually owned by more than just the fraud department. It's owned by audit, legal, compliance, also the CXOs, also asset management, also other things like infrastructure. All of these own a big part of fraud, and simply fraud is on the rise. It's actually 5% of total revenue is actually lost from fraud, and in 2016 it was 2%. So it's significantly growing year on year. So at fcase, we bring the full picture of fraud together, and it's the very first time it's been done. We sit on top of existing fraud engines, and we act as a mission control to quite simply help fraud investigators reduce fraud, reduce customer friction. Customer friction being one of the most important things in a bank today. Now let me give you a scenario. I walk into a Starbucks. I connect to the public Wi-Fi. I all of a sudden receive a text message, or even vishing with a telephone call. Instantly, maybe in phishing, I click on the link, or with vishing, I give over some information. At the end of the day, I might end up with some malware on my device. That malware is trolling my device and physically looking for, let's say, assets that they could use to compromise my bank account. Later on, there's a change of device. That change of device, let's say, could be in a completely different country that I'm in. This is the fraudster's device. And following that, the fraud actually occurs. This is the reality. It happens every single day. Actually, 88% of all phishing emails are clicked on. Actually, I mentioned who are the owners of fraud. Marketing is also a big part of fraud. Banks are not doing enough to educate users on what a phishing email looks like. This is why 88% click on those emails. So let me just show you what fcase does. fcase is like a mission control. It is nothing more than an aggregator that aggregates all of the cases, all of the tickets, all of the transactions, and we do all of the research and put all this information into one place. So the very first time, fraudsters now have no gaps to navigate through, and physically we can address fraud more clearly. So focusing on the particular case that I gave you, we have a phishing alert. And this phishing alert is just a standard case. All we have here is the reason of this phishing, the client ID, the country, the IP address, and any other relevant information that might coexist towards this case. In a typical banking scenario, this would not be fraud. This would be ignored. This is the reality. But with the power of fraud orchestration and cybersecurity orchestration, we're bringing all of this together. So we notice instantly that there's 3 other cases that coexist. These are from 3 other fraud systems. This is incredibly hard, especially here actually in the UK where there's not a global ID. So bringing all this information together is a little bit of a challenge. So what we do straight away is we have an activities screen, which is actually showing the history of the fraud from the very start to the end. And the challenge here is to stop it before it gets to the end. Now, like I said, lots of different engines, lots of different fraud systems are being brought together here. So the very first thing I noticed, there's what's called an IBM Trusted alert, and it's looking at what's called a phishing alert. Again, this is nothing. The next alert that I look at is a malware on a let's say, secure jailbroken phone, probably an Android of some sort in essence. Then we can look at using link analysis and actually see that there is my phone here that has used the bank 20 times, and over here there is a new person using, let's say, my bank account on a brand new device. This might be another device I just purchased. However, when I scroll up here, I see that that new device that is accessing my bank account is also accessing many other bank accounts. Very suspicious. This is not normal. Moving on, I now notice that this is now Mexico. Before, everything was in the UK. So now there's a brand new device that is in Mexico. This is a little bit suspicious. This isn't normal. And then up here, we basically say an unusual amount that has been spent by the customer. In reality, the phishing would have been ignored. So would the malware. But by bringing all this together, we're closing the gaps that fraudsters take advantage of. So what we typically do in this instance is we set up automation, and with fcase we have workflow automation. So we would have found this condition of the phishing, the malware, the change of device, and at that time we would have communicated with the customer via SMS or even Face ID to authenticate the customer. Once they're authenticated, quite simply, we allow the transaction to go ahead. If it's not authenticated, we will block the transaction. So with that, thank you very much for your time.